everyone. So on part 1, we left off quasi-experimental designs. We were looking at experimental methods, right? And we were talking about how our sample or our group is representative of the population at large. And I should have been more specific of that. When we do experimental or quasi-experimental or correlational, any kind of study, we are taking a sample of people. We're taking a small subsection of a population. We're hoping that that sample will be representative of a population. So if I wanted to test Beaufort County Community College students, it'd be hard to test everyone. So I may take one small sample of students that I think would best illustrate, best represent the entirety of the group. So that's what I mean by the difference between a sample and a population when I'm talking. I should have been more clear. But we were talking about quasi-experimental designs and saying that, they're similar to experimental designs except we don't use random assignment. So it's like another confound variable that may account for the causality, so we can't necessarily establish cause and effect with that experiment. Well, we're also going to look at other factors that come into the different studies, because those are more like the design aspect, and it's kind of hard to connect all of these different topics we're talking about in this PowerPoint because there are so many different ways to set up a study. Longitudinal studies, for example, maybe you want to study someone throughout their lifetime. Maybe you want to track how, let's go back to our regular example, how divorce affects children. Except maybe I want to analyze them throughout their lifetime. Maybe I want to look at how their parents' divorce affects their views on marriage. How they communicate with their partners, how happy they are in their relationships. Maybe I want to watch them grow and develop. Okay, so maybe I'm going to track these people for 30 years. That's a great approach. I would get a lot of information, right? But there's downfalls in that it's a long time to lose participants. People could die, sadly. People could just ghost you. You can't contact them to do the updates every year or whatever time frame you set out. And it costs a lot of money. And so to avoid those longitudinal studies issues, people will do cross-sectional research. So when you take a cross-section, you're taking a small sample of a group. So let's say I do want to find out this idea of how, parental divorce affects children's views on marriage. Okay? Now, I don't have the money to follow them for 30 years. So maybe I'm going to do a small cross-section. Maybe I'll sample, originally I wanted to look at 15-year-olds to when they turn 40. Well, I don't have the money, so how about I just view 15 to 18-year-olds, 18 to 21-year-olds, 21 to 24-year-olds, and I'll just sample those cross-sections within this timeline. That's cross-sectional research. I'm taking smaller subsections because I still want to paint that timeline, but I'm doing it in an efficient manner. I can get it all done in an efficient way. Now, the only risk you run with, well, not the only, but one of the risks you run with cross-sectional research is that you could have the cohort effect. There could be experiences certain groups share that could affect the results of your study. So this is not an experiment. For example, if I wanted to measure technology use and how it affects someone's self-esteem, I'm going to have cohort effects if I'm looking at a group of 80-year-olds compared to Gen Z. These different groups have very different experiences growing up with technology. It's very different. So that may be a result of this cohort effect. Surveys are wonderful. Surveys are great for gathering large amounts of concise data. They're really good for coding, getting quick analytics. That's why we use them for course evals. We can get your opinion, how much you agree or rank your professor, right? We get large quantities of data. But we don't really get context behind the questions, so it's really important how you ask the questions. You put in questions to try to catch people so they're not lying. You put honesty check questions. You reverse and recode questions. We try to control for people trying to just answer how they think we want them to answer. So there's a bunch of different ways. I know that's a critique of, some people talk about studies. They say, well, people could lie. True, but that's why psychologists are very specifically trained to ask questions in a way that will not, that will catch people in a lie, so that we could throw out their data if they're lying, or, if it's going to mess up our topic. Now, let's move on to conducting psychology research in the real world. I spent all this time talking about how wonderful experiments are, because we have internal and external validity. It establishes cause and effect, and we can kind of see a broader pattern. But is that how it happens in the real world? If I'm gonna test whether my study guide helped you all actually do well on the test or not, there's going to be other variables there. And the real world is going to be very different from a lab. So the real world has its merits too. Because there's different factors. In real life, there are different psychological factors that are going to affect the outcomes we are looking at. So I feel like such a hypocrite because every time I talk about this, I go, experiments are great, but, our results could change in the real world. So how does that external validity expand to a broader setting? So with overview of research methods for studying daily life, if we wanted to study people's everyday life behaviors, I've included slides on these, but I'm just going to talk on them as they're listed in this picture. We can sample their daily behavior. Like if I wanted to check how someone's recycling patterns, like whether they believe in recycling and stuff, and then how much they recycle, I could give them a survey asking them how much they recycle. But let's say I wanted to, I didn't necessarily believe them, so I wanted to get a real life measurement. Maybe I'd go out of their house and watch them recycle and count how many things they recycle. I know that sounds, absurd, but it's a good example to illustrate my point. We can study daily behaviors in people in the real world because, we all like to say we love to recycle, but then, when we have to wash the plastic, we're like, oh, that's too much to get the cream cheese out of the tub. I'm just going to throw it away, right? So we all, we may say things, but we don't necessarily follow. And so we can also sample people's daily psychology and experiences. What's happened to them, those experiences. What do they think about them? How do they process them? This can be done through journals or even like electronic devices that take snapshots of their experiences or the sounds around them. Another great area that has just surged in the last 10 years is collecting data via smartphones and online behavior. We can use very specific, coding. Like people make the joke on TikTok, if you're on it, it says, wow, this For You page is getting really specific. That's because you have an algorithm, and when you like certain videos, that media platform wants to give you more videos like the one you liked so that you will keep engaging with it. It's how they all function, right? That's why there are hashtags there. It groups them all. And so when we sample that online behavior, we can kind of see what you're liking and maybe if those likes influence your attitudes. Maybe I want to compare your online behavior with a sample of your attitudes. And maybe I want to see how that changes over time. So there are all different types of domains we can explore with this. We can also study daily physiology. So the body and the mind are connected, right? And so we understand that psychology, certain emotions can affect different things about our heart rate. So maybe I want to do an aggression or stress study. Maybe I want to monitor someone's blood pressure or their neurotransmitters or their heart rate, at random intervals throughout a certain period of time. These are all different ways we could study the physiology and how it relates to different psychological concepts. So maybe I'm measuring someone's blood pressure in a specific watching the Super Bowl game because their team's in the Super Bowl, right? Maybe I want to see how that changes from their norm. But studying the actual physiology of someone's body, like brain waves or blood flow to the brain during certain tasks, these are all great methods we can use to just gather more information about how the body works in conjunction with those psychological processes. I talked about studying online behavior. It has a lot of potential. We can even do linguistic analyses, which I think are pretty cool. This could be like scanning blogs, maybe Facebook posts if you wanted to. But remember, whenever they do this, there is consent. We have ethical guidelines to follow. We have to get consent to rate someone's social media. So working on computer behaviors, maybe I want to see industrial organizational psychology. Maybe I want to test how much people are doing non-work tasks on their work computers when they shouldn't be. right? I can measure that. That is a realm of psychology, right? That's why I'm looking at maybe their history or how much time I take their computer, how much time they're spending on what apps. A lot of potential there. Linguistic analyses. Maybe I want to discover more about conspiracy theorists and their attitudes and how they're formed. Maybe I want to conduct some kind of analysis about the words that are used, like the keywords. It's a very specific coding process, and it's really, it's a lot. I've had to do it before. It's not the most reliable thing, but if you make your own code to use to code the actual information, it's pretty good. So you can, let's say, like for me, I was coding animal behaviors. I had to code zookeeper notes. Okay? So anytime a zookeeper said feeding, I would mark it with a 1. Training, I would code it with a 2. It's a very specific code to see how much they actually trained and fed the animals based on their notes. That's what I was doing. But linguistic analyses nonetheless. A lot of potential there. And lastly, we have full cycle psychology. This is the idea that since things in the experiment aren't going to fully elucidate the issue, you can't discover everything about an experiment, like how would this play out in real life. It's taking the topic, if we were to conduct a study of Beaufort County Community College students in our class, we would do our literature review, we would formulate our hypotheses, operationalize our variables, set up our experiment, we would conduct it in a lab, then we would set it up to conduct it in the real world. And then maybe we conduct it in the lab or come together and see the differences between those settings and kind of find some middle ground. But full cycle psychology is like the Hannah Montana best of both worlds over here. So you're trying to bring, to isolate and have that causality from the experimental method in the lab. But you're also trying to see how this would play out in the real world, so it's a good balance. I know this was a lot of information to squeeze in a small amount of time, so please email me if you have any questions. This information will be critical as we go through analyzing the different theories, so you have an understanding of how we come to this information and why it's important. And as always, email me if you have any questions. Have a great week.